There are a few questions that get asked repeatedly, and one of them is, if you have extra cash at the end of every month and you want to put it to good use, do you use that extra money to pay down your mortgage, or should you invest that money in the stock market instead, where you could potentially earn a better return? If you rely entirely on the math will tell you that holding on to a 3% mortgage is more advantageous than paying it off early. But if you rely on emotions, or if you rely entirely on emotions, your emotions might be screaming that you should invest the extra funds to pay off your mortgage because it brings you your peace of mind, or for whatever reason. But what if there was a sweet spot where you could balance both? Whenever this topic comes up, it often turns into a debate of either or. Some folks argue for investing because the numbers back it up. And on the other hand, there's a case for paying off your mortgage to gain that peace of mind and security. It's uncommon to hear a balanced perspective that finds a middle ground. That's what this video will cover. I'll walk you through an example and illustrate why the math might lean one way, but it's totally reasonable to choose a different approach. Let's run a simple scenario, and I'll use an online mortgage calculator for it. Just search for a mortgage payoff calculator and you will find plenty of options. As you're probably aware that most people have mortgages in the 3 to 4% range. So in this scenario, I'll use a 4% mortgage as an example. Your mortgage has a 30-year term. You finance $200,000. The interest on your mortgage is 4%, and over the life of the loan, you would pay a total interest of just $140,000, and it will take you full 360 months to pay it off, which is 30 years, of course. Now, what if you're able to put an extra $300 per month towards your mortgage? So we go back to the mortgage calculator and put $300 as additional payment. With the additional payment, not only will you save $58,000 in interest, you will also pay off the loan in 228 months, which is 19 years. So you will save $58,000 in interest and you will save 11 years. That sounds great, right? At the end of the 19th year, you are mortgage free. You have no mortgage and $1,497 of cash flow every month. So what if you invest the entire $1,497 from year 19 to year 30? The $1,497 include the mortgage amount plus the extra payments you were making. For this, we'll use a compound interest calculator. The monthly payment is $1,497 for a length of 11 years, and we assume an average interest rate of 9%. At the end of the 30th year, you would have $315,000. And this concludes our first scenario. At the end of the 30th year, you would have $315,000, you're mortgage free, and you saved $58,000 in interest. Let's do the same scenario, but instead of putting $300 towards the mortgage, what if we invest the extra funds in the S&P 500 from the get-go? Same 30-year mortgage at 4% interest. You obviously take the full 30 years to pay off the mortgage, and you will pay an additional $58,000 in interest. But you have also been consistently investing $300 every month for a full 30 years. At the end of the 30th year, you would have $490,000. That's almost $175,000 more than the first scenario. So even though you would have paid more interest over the life of the loan, you have compound interest working in your favor on the sidelines. And that's an important factor. What if we push out scenario 1 and scenario 2 to 40 years instead of 30? In scenario 1, after your mortgage is paid off, you're investing the full $1,497 from year 19 to year 40. That's 21 years. Plug that into the calculator and you get just over $1 million at the end of the 40th year. What about scenario 2? A $300 per month investment for an entire 40 years. You get about $1.2 million. Keep in mind that from year 30 to year 40, you did not have a mortgage payment in scenario 2. So we did not even take that into account, and you're still ahead. So whether you run the numbers for 30 years or you push it out to 40 years, in scenario 2, you come out ahead because of a beautiful concept in finance called the compound interest. Your money just had more time to work in scenario 2. All this mumbling and fumbling with numbers to say that math clearly shows that paying off a low interest mortgage is not advisable. That's what the math says. It's also worth noting that I ran the number with a 4% interest mortgage. If you use a mortgage rate lower than 3%, the result will be even more favorable towards investing. There's also another great argument for not paying off a low interest mortgage. It is a great hedge against inflation. Let's assume that inflation rate is 3% per year. Mortgage amount of $300,000 at a fixed interest rate of 4%, and you have a 30-year term on your mortgage. Your mortgage payment is $1,432. Now, mind you, that this amount will remain fixed for the remainder of the loan term. It will not not increase. And that part is important. In this case, you'll pay $1,432 per month for 30 years regardless of inflation. So as inflation increases, the purchasing power of your money decreases. This means that over time, the same amount of money will buy fewer goods and services. And due to inflation, the real cost of your fixed mortgage payment is effectively less. You're paying $1,432 a month when inflation is 3% annually. In 10 years, if inflation averages 3% annually, what costs $1,432 today might cost roughly $1,926 in 10 years due to inflation. However, your mortgage payment stays $1,432. In terms of today's dollar, the fixed rate mortgage payments become less burdensome as inflation erodes the real value of money. Essentially, you're paying back your mortgage with cheaper dollars. And this, of course, is not the easiest concept to get a grasp of. If none of that made sense, think of how your grandparents often talk about their mortgage being just, let's say, $400. It doesn't sound like a lot, right? That's because inflation has greatly reduced the real value of those dollars. Similarly, the $2,000 mortgage that you have now may seem trivial in 30 years. So far, I've talked about why investing makes more sense if you have a low interest mortgage. But let's set the math aside for a moment. The real world is far more complex than any spreadsheet can capture. All this math and all these hypothetical scenarios share a common assumption that our investments will keep performing well and continue to average a 9% return. Historically, the S&P 500 has exceeded that average, but the reality is we cannot be certain. Investing our money is essentially making an educated guess. On the other hand, paying off your mortgage offers a guaranteed return by reducing your overall interest paid over the life of the loan. Paying off your mortgage provides a certainty. People who are in favor of paying off their mortgage aren't wrong either. Now, I'm personally not paying off my 3% mortgages. I have a solid emergency fund and my risk tolerance honestly is more than most people. But at the same time, I understand the argument on the other side as well. And you know what? They're not wrong either. Sometimes it's not just about the bottom line. It's also about the peace of mind. Owning your home outright offers benefits that go beyond the monetary measures. And for many, having no monthly mortgage payment before retirement can offer a significant mental relief, especially when you're planning to live on a fixed income. I also think having a paid off primary residence before you hit retirement age is not a bad idea. In fact, it's a great idea. You don't want your biggest expense looming over your head as you enter retirement. And I actually posted this question once. I said that it is a great idea to have your primary residence paid off as you reach retirement. And that did not go too well. Someone said that this is the dumbest thing they've heard today. Having said that, if you prefer to keep things simple, Fidelity offers a handy rule of thumb, the 6% rule. What they concluded is that if your interest rate on your debt is below 6%, based on some assumptions, it is usually more advantageous to invest the extra funds. This is because with a lower interest rate, your long-term investment returns are more likely to exceed the benefits of paying down other debt. Now, they did make some assumptions that you may want to look into. But honestly, if you are a rule of thumb kind of a person, this is not a bad strategy. Also worth noting that paying off your mortgage does not release you from your home-related obligations such as property taxes and homeowners insurance. Okay, so you might be expecting me to wrap this up by saying that there's no wrong or right answer, but that's not the case. There is a right answer, and the math suggests that you should not rush to pay off a low interest mortgage, especially if it's around the 3% range. My approach is following the 6% rule. For mortgages with interest rate under 6%, I don't focus on paying them off early. For those over 6%, I make an extra payment each year. For example, if my mortgage is $1,200, I add an additional $100 to the principal each month. And full disclaimer, I only have one mortgage with an interest rate of over 6%, 6.75% to be specific. Everything else that I've purchased was before interest rates went up. This is what works for me, and this is my sweet spot. Depending on your situation, your goals, and your age, you have to find your sweet spot.